So what is it that brings you to this Unitarian Universalist congregation week in and week out? I can't answer that question for you, but I can answer it for myself as a Unitarian Universalist and as a Unitarian Universalist minister. I'm a member of a Unitarian Universalist congregation because I care deeply about a responsible search for truth and meaning, mine and yours. And because I admire and love fellow seekers who gather each week to support each other in searching. And I appreciate the values that we affirm together: love and interdependence and equity and justice and transformation and pluralism and generosity. And I understand deeply, I understand that together we are better, stronger, and nobler than we could ever be on our own. And that a just and loving community like UU Miami provides us with accountability and a venue in which we can express our values in tangible acts day by day. That wasn't always the case for me. You see, I grew up in a Catholic church. I was told what to believe and what to value and how to embody those values in the world. I didn't question much anyway, until there was a value that they told me that I had to live out. Pro-life, anti-abortion, anti-women's reproductive rights. And I couldn't. I couldn't affirm or promote any of that. It was church doctrine. And by the way, this has not been church doctrine in the Catholic Church from the beginning of Catholicism or Christianity, which you will hear from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Pro-Life Activities. I thought it would be important, because it was important to me, to understand how this doctrine came to be. So a little history. So it starts out with a sketch of events in the first 6 Christian centuries, when Christians sought ways to distinguish themselves from pagans who accepted contraception and abortion. During this period, Christians also decided that sexual pleasure was evil. In the 5th century, St. Augustine declared that abortion is not homicide, but was a sin, and it was intended to conceal, especially if it was intended to conceal fornication or adultery. In the 13th century, St. Thomas Aquinas declared that a fetus was a vegetative state for a while, then an animal soul, and finally a rational soul when the body was developed. In 1588, anyone who resorted to contraception or abortion was subject to excommunication. These excommunication rules were relaxed in 1591, and then in 1679, the Catholic Church banned abortion for all those, even those, who would die because of the pregnancy. And finally, in 1750, excommunication again became the punishment for all abortions. And that has been the doctrine to this very day. As a Catholic, I was never taught any of the nuances about the Catholic Church changing stance on abortion. I was taught that the anti-abortion stance was doctrinal, and even though, as I later discovered when doing my own research, there is no biblical support for it. In 1976, when I was asked to take on this doctrine as my value, there was no one, no priest, no nun, no lay leader, who would engage with me on this issue. No place in my church where I could openly say, I don't believe in this value. I am not and cannot be against women's reproductive choice. I think we should talk about this and together decide if this value is consistent with who we are and who we want to be. I couldn't be open with my values. I couldn't be vulnerable with my community, my faith community. And I couldn't live out the values they espoused in the Catholic Church. And so I left. Now, I say all this not to say that Catholicism is somehow bad or wrong. I have lots of Catholic friends, and I affirm their spiritual path, that it works for them, even if we agree on very significant issues. I will say that being a Catholic just didn't fit for me. And it increasingly didn't fit as I became more and more aware of who I am in this complicated world that we live in. Things changed for me when I began to really discern my personal values, ethics, and morals. When I was beginning my personal search for truth and meaning. But as I began this search, I also realized I needed a community with whom I could share my journey. Because even a rich spiritual life without congregational embodiment can be idolatrous. In other words, left to my own devices and my own spiritual search and ethical discernment, I was in danger of concluding that my and only my ethics and or beliefs were right and that I should follow my value system alone, regardless of the consequences to people around me or people in my community, people I loved and cared about. I needed to process my beliefs and values in the company of like-minded people who are not afraid of hard questions and sometimes even harder answers. I also realized that to develop a healthy, loving values, I would have to be willing to be vulnerable in this community, willing to trust others with my thoughts, my feelings, my beliefs. And so I invited you today to do what I had to do as I came into Unitarian Universalism, to take a risk. In this meditation we did, I asked you to be vulnerable with one other person, to share a value that you felt strongly about, and to share why that value is important to you. I've invited you to do this because I believe this is the kind of sharing that is essential for being part of a Unitarian Universalist community. In many faith communities, the values that are affirmed and promoted are decided on by a holy book or a holy person or centuries of religious tradition. But here it is different. In Unitarian Universalism, we as a community, and I'm speaking both of as Unitarian Universalists across the world and of this community, UniU Miami, decide together the values that we choose to affirm and promote. To do this, we must risk sharing our personal values and our deepest selves, who we are and who we want to be, with one another. The sharing and creation of shared values and visions bonds us together as a community. And when it does, when we affirm those values together, we say those to each other. And we live them out in this community together, so that we can take them out into the world and live them out as well. And come back here and talk to each other about that. And that, my friends, strengthens them in our hearts and in our lives. Another thing that's important is that whatever values we decide on, once discerned and decided, are not static. Because new people join us with their values and their voices, and they become members and friends of this church and of Unitarian Universalism. And one other thing, we individually are not static beings. You and I will change over time, and what we share of our values and who we are will not be static, because we will change. And we'll need to bring that to this community and say, listen, I've thought about this, and this is what I think about it now. I've had this experience. And we have to be able to share those with one another. And all that's going to influence our values and influence Unitarian Universalism. And that's the way it should be. And so, every few years, most every congregation within Unitarian Universalism comes together and talks about these things. We're doing it April 23rd here at our congregational retreat. It's a formal opportunity to take the experience that you've had during this meditation to a deeper and more collaborative level, to help all of us create the values that we will stand behind, that we will affirm together, that we will live out in the world. Sharing with one another your beliefs and what's important to you about this faith community and how you envision the future of this faith community helps us determine who we are together. This process embodies what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist and a member of UU Miami. Who we are and who we will be is dependent on each and every one of you. And with clarity of who we are and a vision for our future, we can achieve more clarity about what we do in worship, what issues that UU Miami stands in witness of, how we would like to see our faith development program evolve, and what it means for us to be a beloved community. Each and every Unitarian Universalist congregation, including this one, is a covenanted community. That means we make promises to one another about how we will be in community with each other. Part of those promises are about our values. And some of those promises are about how we will be with one another in relationship. These are sacred promises and essential to building trust with one another, sharing deeply with one another, being vulnerable with one another, discerning what our values are, and journeying together for truth and meaning. So as we move into this process, as we share with one another, there has to be a frame around that, tenets of what we promise to one another that we need to consider as we journey in this discernment together. Promises about how we'll be in relationship. Now, I want to share some of those promises with you and see if they fit for you, because, the promises we make to one another are things that we feel are important, that we're willing to stand behind as we are in relationship with one another. And what I present to you today is not a comprehensive list, because your voice is not included in this just yet, but it will be. It should be. But let me share this list with you. So, in our relationships with one another, we affirm and promote to be welcoming and inclusive. To respect each other's identities, including pronouns. To let all voices be heard. To honor an individual's right to say no or pass, whether it be a prayer, a meditation, a ritual, or a discussion. To bring openness, creativity, and flexibility to all of our interactions. To deeply and actively listen to each other's sharing. To support one another in love, respect, and care. To get curious, not furious, when times get rough. I turn to wonder. I think that's the best way. For instance, when things get a little tough, I might say, I wonder what you're trying to say. Could you help me understand? Rather than react when times get difficult. And each person should be treated as a valued member of this community. And finally, and again, this is not a comprehensive list, but the ones I thought were important. Let's look at this last promise. I just think it's so important. Each one of us will speak up when we are hurt or uncomfortable. I want to talk a little more about that, because I just think it's so important. None of us can know when you are hurt or uncomfortable unless you say it, unless you tell us. We've had people leave this congregation, a thing that every community of any kind has experienced, and we have no idea why that person left. Were they hurt? Were they uncomfortable? Were they burned out? Did they feel unheard or unseen? We can only be authentic, honest with one another if we are open with one another when we're hurt. You are important. What you feel is important. You deserve to be treated as you want to be treated. And it's not all about you. You must treat others the way they want to be treated too. Anytime someone says they've been hurt or made to feel uncomfortable, we should stop. Whatever we're doing, it doesn't matter, and talk about it. Nothing, no committee report, no wall color, no lunch selection, no dish or trash left out is more important than the relationships we share with one another in community. Period. Now, step off my pulpit. No, so I was just preaching there a little bit. Both figuratively and physically. I'll get off this in just a moment. But I want to say a few more things. I want to tell you that you are loved and there is a space for you here. That is what is foundational to Unitarian Universalism. I've come to believe that this love that I speak of is the source of our values and our covenant, our promises to each other. Love is why we will never be a static faith, or static faith community. Each and every person who joins us within these walls or online has a place here. And we will always, always hold that space open for you. So may it be.